He wakes up before the city fully breathes. The room is quiet, except for the faint sound of traffic far away. Darkness has been his world for many years now, so morning does not arrive with light. It arrives with sound, with memory, and with routine. He sits up slowly, feeling the edge of the bed with his hand, making sure everything is where it should be. Every object in the room has a fixed place. If one thing moves, the whole day can feel unbalanced. He washes his face with cold water, letting it wake him up. The mirror means nothing to him anymore, but he still stands in front of it out of habit. Once, long ago, he used to look at himself and imagine who he wanted to become. Now he listens instead. He listens to the way water hits the sink, the way the pipes hum, the way his own breathing changes when he feels anxious. These sounds tell him how ready he is to face the day. His blindness did not come suddenly. It arrived slowly, like a door closing inch by inch. First, things were just blurry. Then shadows began to swallow shapes. Doctors spoke in careful voices, choosing words that felt heavy even when he could not fully see their faces. By the time darkness settled in for good, he had already learned to fear it. What he did not know then was that the fear would not last forever. Music had been part of his life since childhood. Before he lost his sight, he used to watch his fingers move across the piano keys. He loved how black and white keys worked together, like a quiet conversation. When his vision faded, he thought music would leave him too. For a while, he avoided the piano. Sitting in front of it reminded him of everything he had lost. The silence felt safer than trying and failing. But silence has a way of becoming loud. The more he avoided music, the more empty his days felt. One afternoon, when the house felt too quiet to bear, he sat down at the piano again. His hands shook at first. He pressed one key, then another. The sound filled the room, warm and familiar. His fingers remembered what his eyes could not see. In that moment, something inside him softened. Music had not abandoned him. It had been waiting. From that day on, the piano became his guide. He practiced by touch and by sound, learning to trust his hands fully. He memorized every small detail of the instrument. He counted steps from his chair to the piano, measured distance with his feet, and marked places with tiny textures only he could notice. Slowly, confidence returned, not all at once, but piece by piece. Still, the world outside his home felt frightening. Crossing streets was hard. People spoke too loudly or too softly, unsure how to treat him. Some offered help without asking, while others avoided him completely. He learned that being blind did not just change how he saw the world. It changed how the world saw him. Many assumed weakness. Few imagined strength. Money was always tight. Music lessons were expensive, and performing jobs were rare for someone like him. One day, while listening to the sounds of the city from a park bench, he heard a piano playing in the distance. The notes floated through the air, mixed with laughter and footsteps. Someone nearby mentioned it was a public piano, open for anyone to play. That simple comment planted a quiet idea in his mind. The thought of playing in public scared him more than he expected. At home, mistakes were private. In public, every wrong note would belong to everyone. He worried people would stare, judge, or pity him. Yet something stronger than fear pushed him forward. He wanted to be heard, not seen. He wanted to let the music speak before anyone could decide who he was. The first time he went out to play, his hands were cold. He arrived early, guided by familiar sounds and careful steps. The piano felt different from his own, but still welcoming. He took a deep breath and began. At first, he played softly, almost apologetically. People passed by without stopping. Some slowed for a second, then moved on. He told himself this was expected. As time passed, his playing grew stronger. He forgot where he was and focused only on the sound. The noise of the street faded. The piano became his whole world. When he finally stopped, the silence felt heavy. He wondered if anyone had listened at all. He packed up quietly and left, unsure whether to return. But the next morning, he found himself thinking about that piano again. He remembered how alive he felt while playing. So he went back. Then he went again the day after. Slowly, Playing in public became part of his life. He did not know it then, but something small had begun to change. People started standing nearby for longer moments. Footsteps paused. Conversations softened. Sometimes he sensed someone close by, breathing differently, listening carefully. He never asked for attention. He simply played. Each day required bravery. Not the loud kind, but the quiet kind that shows up even when fear remains. He faced the same doubts every morning. Would people laugh? Would someone tell him to stop? Would he fail? And each day he chose to sit at the piano anyway. At the end of part 1, his life is still simple and uncertain. He does not know that messages are being left. He does not know how many lives his music will touch. All he knows is that in a world without sight, sound has become his truth. And for the first time since losing his vision, he feels like he is moving forward, one note at a time. The street was alive with ordinary chaos, yet he moved through it like a quiet current. The sounds of footsteps, car horns, and distant conversations blended into a rhythm that became familiar to him. Today was different from the days he played at home. Today he would play where strangers could hear him, not just family or friends. The thought made his stomach tighten, but he told himself the only way to grow was to step forward. He approached the public piano in the small square. It was a well-used instrument, its keys worn but still producing beautiful sound. He ran his hands over the smooth surfaces, feeling the faint scratches left by those who had played before him. There was history here, he thought, and now he would add his own story. He took a deep breath and let his fingers find their place. The first notes were tentative, almost shy. He was aware of every movement around him. A mother guiding her child, a man reading a newspaper, someone walking a dog. None of them seemed to notice him yet. He kept playing, soft and steady, letting the music rise and fall naturally. At first, he felt invisible, as if his presence had no meaning outside his own ears. But as he continued, he began to sense a change. A few steps away, a young woman had paused. She was not making a show of listening, just standing quietly, letting the sound reach her. Then another person stopped, and another. It was subtle, almost unnoticeable, but he felt it. The music was no longer just for himself. It was touching others, even if they did not speak or applaud. This realization filled him with cautious hope. He played for a long time, lost in the flow of sound. Each note was shaped by memory and feeling, by the quiet struggles and triumphs of his own life. His fingers moved with confidence now, remembering every key, every subtle difference in weight and touch. The piano seemed to respond to him, offering comfort as he gave it sound. The world outside faded until it was only him and the music. When he finally stopped, the square was quiet again, but not empty. People lingered for a moment, then moved on, leaving a sense of connection behind. He felt it in the air, a warmth that was not his own, but shared. He packed his few belongings and walked carefully through the streets, replaying the music in his mind. Something had shifted, though he could not yet name it. The next day he returned. The piano awaited, as if it had been expecting him. This time he played with less hesitation, letting the notes flow freely without thinking too much. Occasionally someone would stop to listen. Sometimes a child would try to sing along, or a passerby would hum quietly to themselves. These small signs reminded him that music could reach even when words could not. One afternoon, as he was finishing a piece, he noticed something unusual. On the ledge near the piano, there was a folded piece of paper. His fingers trembled slightly as he picked it up, careful not to tear it. He could feel the writing, the indentation of ink pressed into the page. Curiosity pulled him to ask a nearby shopkeeper to read it aloud. The words were simple but kind, expressing gratitude for the music and sharing a story of someone's difficult day that had been lightened by hearing him play. He was surprised. People had been listening more closely than he imagined, and some had even taken the time to write down their thoughts. From that day, he found a few more notes here and there. Each message was different. Some short and simple, others long and full of emotion. Some were stories of personal pain, others were expressions of hope. He began to realize that his music had become a silent conversation. Every key he pressed could reach into someone else's life, and in return, their messages reached him. He had never imagined that playing a piano in a public square could create such a connection. The more he played, the braver he became. He experimented with different melodies and tempos, allowing himself to feel freely. He learned to play according to mood, to match the energy of the people around him without seeing them. Some days were harder than others. Noise and distraction could overwhelm him, and some passers-by were impatient or dismissive. Still, he returned each day, driven by the small moments of shared humanity that made all the fear worthwhile. Sometimes, he would read the notes aloud with the help of a friend or a kind stranger. Each story revealed courage, struggle, and hope in ways that were both familiar and surprising. Some messages were playful, making him smile. Others were serious, leaving him thoughtful for hours afterward. He began to see that the piano had become more than an instrument. It was a bridge, connecting him to a world he could not see but could feel in profound ways. His reputation grew slowly, almost imperceptibly. People began to recognize his presence even before they saw him. Some came specifically to hear him play. Others left notes when he was not there, hoping he would return to read them. With every note, every message, his confidence strengthened. Music had given him a way to communicate without sight, to be seen and heard in ways he never thought possible. The piano taught him patience as well. He learned to wait for moments of genuine connection, to trust that not every listener needed to respond immediately. Some people simply passed by, letting the sound wash over them without interruption. Others lingered, making the music part of their day. Each encounter was meaningful in its own way, reminding him that impact does not always have to be loud or obvious. He also began to notice patterns. Certain melodies drew more attention. Certain rhythms seemed to resonate with people who were carrying heavy thoughts. Sometimes he would improvise, testing his intuition and learning to trust it. Over time, he developed a sense of timing and sensitivity that went beyond technical skill. He understood how sound could affect mood, and how presence, even unseen, could comfort or inspire. Through it all, he kept the notes carefully, folding them neatly and storing them in a small box. Each message became a treasure, a reminder that his efforts mattered. He could not see the faces of those he touched, but he could feel their existence through words and music. These hidden messages were proof that bravery was not always about grand gestures or public acclaim. It was about showing up, every day, and giving what one had, even when the world seemed indifferent. One evening, after a particularly long day of playing, he sat on a bench nearby and reflected on his journey. The city lights shimmered on wet pavement, and he listened to the hum of life around him. He felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing that even in darkness, he could create light for others. His fingers itched to return to the piano, to continue the conversation that had begun with a single note. He realized that playing in public had taught him more than just bravery. It had taught him patience, empathy, and resilience. He had learned to listen closely, not just to music, but to the subtle expressions of humanity around him. Each note, each message, each moment of connection reinforced the idea that life could still be full, even without sight. He understood now that courage was not the absence of fear, but the choice to act despite it. From that day forward, the public piano became an extension of his home. It was a place where he could give and receive, where his music could speak for him, and where others could respond in kind. The hidden messages continued to arrive, each one a reminder that the world was not indifferent. There was kindness, gratitude, and shared experience waiting to be discovered, if only one had the courage to seek it. Even in the face of doubt, even when footsteps passed without pause, he continued to play. Every note was a declaration that he existed, that his story mattered, and that the small, quiet acts of bravery could ripple through the lives of others. Music had become a bridge, a language that transcended sight, and through it, he found a connection that was deeper than he could have imagined. Part 2 ends with him seated at the piano, hands poised over the keys, ready to continue. He does not know what messages will come next, nor who will hear his music tomorrow. What he does know is that each day brings new opportunity, new courage, and new hidden stories waiting to be discovered. The world remains uncertain, but he has found his place within it. One note, one connection, and one hidden message at a time. The folded notes had become part of his routine. Every morning, he would carefully pick up the small box he kept by his side and open each one, reading the words aloud with the help of someone willing to guide him. Sometimes, the notes contained simple phrases of thanks. Other times, they held stories that weighed heavy on his heart. People shared their struggles, hopes, and moments of quiet happiness, all inspired by his music. He began to realize that what he had once considered a small act, playing a few notes on a public piano, had reached farther than he ever imagined. One afternoon, a note caught his attention in a way the others hadn't. The paper was slightly larger, and the words were written with a steady hand. When read aloud, the message told the story of a person who had been struggling with loneliness, fear, and loss. It described how hearing his music had brought a moment of peace, a break from the overwhelming thoughts that had followed them for years. He felt a deep warmth in his chest, but also a strange heaviness. This was more than gratitude. It was a confession, an unspoken connection between two lives. He kept playing, but the weight of these messages began to change him. He started to listen differently, not just to the piano, but to the sounds of the world around him. The laughter of children, the quiet murmur of conversations, even the distant barking of a dog. These became part of his music, guiding the flow of his fingers across the keys. He began to understand that music was not just notes and rhythms. It was a living dialogue, a way to reach others without seeing them. People noticed the change. More often now, they lingered to listen. Some left their own messages, inspired by the courage and presence he brought to each performance. He discovered that even when no one spoke or watched, his music left an imprint. It moved through the air, brushing against the hearts of strangers, offering a moment of relief, hope, or simply companionship. The box of notes grew, and each one became a testament to quiet courage. One day, as he played a particularly gentle piece, he sensed someone standing closer than usual. The sound of careful footsteps and a quiet cough told him a person had stopped nearby. He played on, letting the music flow naturally, and after a while, a soft voice spoke to him. It was a young man, hesitant and nervous. He told the pianist that his music had inspired him to pick up his own instrument again after years of neglect. He spoke of fear, failure, and shame, and how hearing someone persist despite challenges had given him courage. The conversation lasted only a few minutes, but it stayed with him. He realized that every note he played could encourage someone, even if he never knew it. The messages in his box were no longer just words on paper. They were reminders that life, despite darkness and uncertainty, could carry moments of connection and understanding. He began to treasure these connections more deeply than he ever valued applause or recognition. The piano had become a bridge not just to sound, but to the hearts of others. Over time, he started experimenting with the notes themselves. He would play melodies that reflected the emotions he sensed in the messages he received. Some days, he would play slow and reflective, matching the sadness of a note describing loss or hardship. Other times, he played fast and light, mirroring joy and hope. This approach made the music feel alive, and people noticed the subtle changes in tone. Even though he could not see them, he could sense their presence, their reactions, their attentiveness. The more he played, the more he felt that he had found a purpose beyond simply creating music. His life had become a series of quiet exchanges, small moments of bravery that touched unseen lives. He understood now that courage was not always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it was just the act of showing up, of trusting that one's presence mattered. The piano had become a place where he could practice this bravery daily, letting his fingers speak for what his voice could not. One evening, as he was closing up for the day, he noticed a stack of new notes piled carefully near the piano. They had been left by someone who had watched him play from a distance for weeks. The notes told stories of personal struggle and triumph, moments when someone's life had shifted quietly because of his music. Some described hardships similar to his own experiences. Others told of victories he could only imagine. The messages were deeply personal and full of honesty, and reading them with someone's help brought tears to his eyes. He started to understand a pattern emerging. The notes were not just random expressions. They were responses to him, shaped by his music, his persistence, his courage to face each day despite fear. People were sharing pieces of their own lives, trusting him with feelings they had not expressed to anyone else. And in return, he felt a responsibility to continue, to play not just for himself, but for everyone who had entrusted him with their stories. With this realization, his performances changed subtly. He allowed himself to linger on certain notes, to stretch melodies in ways that reflected the depth of emotion he was reading. He played with care, understanding that each sound could hold meaning for someone. His confidence grew not because he was perfect, but because he had learned to listen, to truly hear both the music and the hearts of those who experienced it. He also began to see the courage in others more clearly. Some people, after listening, would approach him quietly and leave a message in person. Others would watch from a distance, inspired to act in ways they never thought they could. His music was no longer just a personal solace. It had become a catalyst for bravery, a silent encouragement that rippled through the lives of strangers. Every note he played carried a weight and purpose that he had never anticipated. There were challenges, of course. Not every interaction was gentle. Sometimes people ignored him, spoke harshly, or treated him with impatience. Occasionally, he faced moments of self-doubt, wondering if his music was enough. But the notes in his box, the voices of those he had touched, reminded him that even small acts mattered. The courage to continue, to show up every day despite fear or uncertainty, was itself a form of bravery. He began to reflect on his journey, thinking about the years before he played in public. The fear, the silence, the doubt, they had been heavy burdens. But each note he played now, each message he received, had transformed those experiences into a source of strength. The darkness he lived in was not a limit but a space where music and connection could flourish. In that darkness he had found light, not for himself alone, but for many. The piano became a symbol, not just of his talent, but of persistence, courage, and empathy. Each performance, each note, each message was a thread in a larger tapestry of shared human experience. He felt a growing sense of responsibility, understanding that what he offered could influence the lives of others in ways he might never fully know. The box of hidden messages was no longer just a collection of paper. It was a collection of lives, a map of human resilience and hope. Even as weeks turned into months, he continued to play every day. Some notes were from people he had never seen again. Others were from familiar faces who had become quiet companions in his journey. Each one reinforced the idea that bravery is often quiet, uncelebrated, and yet profoundly meaningful. He had discovered that courage was not always about grand gestures, but about presence, consistency, and a willingness to connect without expectation. Through it all, he remained humble. He did not claim heroism. He did not seek recognition. He simply played, guided by the invisible threads of connection that tied him to those who listened and wrote. The hidden messages had opened his eyes in a different way, teaching him to see with his ears, his heart, and his understanding of human emotion. Each day, he learned more about the strength and vulnerability that coexist in people, and how one person, even unseen, can touch many lives. By the end of part 3, the pianist had grown into a figure of quiet inspiration. The notes were no longer just words. They were stories, emotions, and proof that music could carry messages that words alone could not. He had discovered that playing in public was not merely an act of performance, but an act of courage, empathy, and connection. Every day brought new notes, new stories, and new reminders that even in darkness, one could illuminate the lives of others with patience, persistence, and music. He had begun to see that bravery is built one note, one message, and one connection at a time, and he was ready to continue the journey. He arrived at the square that morning feeling a mixture of excitement and unease. The piano stood waiting, familiar yet unpredictable, a reminder that every performance could bring joy or challenge. He had grown confident over time, but there were still moments when fear whispered in his ear. What if he played poorly? What if no one listened? What if the messages stopped coming? Each fear was real, yet he had learned to face them daily. The streets were busy, the air filled with the scent of fresh bread from a nearby bakery and the faint hum of distant traffic. As he approached the piano, he noticed a small crowd gathering, drawn by curiosity more than expectation. Some faces were familiar, others new. He set his bag down carefully and ran his fingers over the keys, feeling the smooth surface and the familiar grooves where countless hands had played before him. This piano was not just an instrument. It was a bridge between himself and the world. He began with a soft melody, letting the notes drift gently into the air. The crowd's attention grew slowly, people leaning in without realizing it. He played with a freedom that came from experience, shaping each note to match the mood of the day. There was a rhythm to the streets that he could feel, footsteps, chatter, the rustle of newspapers, and he let it guide him. The music was no longer just for himself. It belonged to the space around him, weaving into the lives of those who listened. Halfway through a long piece, a sudden disruption startled him. A loud shout from a nearby street corner, a crash of metal, and the movement of people caused him to falter briefly. His hands shook, and he feared he might lose the flow. For a moment, panic threatened to take over. But then he took a deep breath, closed his eyes, and remembered why he played. He had faced fear before in silence and solitude, and now he would face it again in the open. Slowly, he regained his rhythm, each note a quiet declaration that fear would not stop him. The crowd responded instinctively. Some watched in awe, some whispered encouragement, but all seemed to sense the courage behind each note. When the music continued, stronger than before, the energy shifted. People leaned closer, moved more slowly, and for a few moments, the chaos of the city faded. In that shared silence, he felt a profound connection, a bond with strangers he would never see again. It was a reminder that bravery was not always about heroics. Sometimes, it was simply about presence. After finishing the piece, he reached for the box of notes that had become a treasure trove of stories and emotions. One particular note stood out today. The words described a person who had struggled for years with self-doubt and despair, finding courage in the simple act of listening to his music. The note was long, filled with detail and emotion. Reading it aloud with help brought tears to his eyes, but also a deep sense of purpose. He realized that his bravery had the power to inspire others in ways he could never fully measure. Inspired, he decided to improvise. He let his fingers move freely, creating melodies that reflected the emotions he felt from the notes and the energy of the crowd. The music rose and fell, sometimes tender, sometimes strong, weaving a narrative that no words could capture. People stopped in their tracks, some closing their eyes, others leaning in closer, drawn by the sincerity of the sound. He could feel the presence of each listener, a silent dialogue unfolding between his hands and their hearts. Hours passed unnoticed. The sun shifted, casting long shadows across the square, but he continued to play. Each note was deliberate, each pause meaningful. He had learned to trust his instincts, to let the music speak for him. And yet, he remained aware of the challenges that came with visibility. Some people were impatient, some walked past without a glance. Others approached hesitantly, unsure how to react. He learned to accept this as part of the journey, understanding that not every gesture needed to be acknowledged to have value. At one point, a young woman approached, holding a note folded neatly in her hand. Her voice was quiet, but steady, as she asked if he could read it. The note described a struggle with illness and fear, and how his music had been a source of comfort during difficult nights. She thanked him for showing that life, even in darkness, could carry moments of beauty and courage. He listened carefully, feeling the weight of her words, and nodded in silent understanding. He realized that the act of playing, of showing up, was itself a form of bravery, and that the music had become a language of empathy. This realization stayed with him as the day progressed. He noticed small gestures of courage around him. A man helping an elderly woman across the street, a child offering a flower to a stranger. people stopping to listen instead of rushing past. These moments, subtle yet powerful, reminded him that bravery existed in many forms. His music was a reflection of that bravery, a way to amplify the quiet acts that often went unseen. The sun began to dip toward the horizon, and he knew it was time to leave. He played a final piece, slow and reflective, letting the notes linger in the air long after his hands had moved away. The crowd responded with quiet applause, not loud or demanding, but sincere. People left, carrying the music with them in their own way. He packed up his belongings carefully, feeling a sense of fulfillment that had little to do with recognition and everything to do with connection. Walking home, he reflected on the day. Every challenge, every moment of fear, had been met with a choice to continue. Each note played was an act of bravery, a testament to the quiet courage that exists in ordinary life. The hidden messages, the crowd, the city, all of it had become part of a larger story, one that he was helping to write without seeing the full picture. The bravery he practiced daily was not always visible, but it was real and meaningful, shaping both his life and the lives of others. That evening, he sat by the window in his small apartment, listening to the hum of the city and the distant sounds of music from other parts of the neighborhood. He opened the box of notes once more, reading each one slowly, letting the words sink in. Some made him smile, others brought tears, but all reinforced the truth he had come to understand. Bravery is not about being fearless, but about facing life despite fear. The messages reminded him that his actions, though quiet, had ripple effects far beyond what he could see. As night fell, he played one more piece on his own piano at home, the notes echoing softly in the empty room. He thought about the people he had touched that day, the stories he had read, and the courage he had witnessed in both himself and others. The music filled the space with a sense of calm and purpose. He understood that life would always have uncertainties and obstacles, but through persistence, empathy, and courage, one could make a meaningful impact. By the end of the day, he felt a renewed sense of mission. The piano had become more than a musical instrument. It was a tool for connection, a bridge between his world and the lives of others. Each performance, each note, each message was a building block of bravery. He knew that there would be days of fear, moments of doubt, and challenges to face, but he was ready. The music, the people, and the hidden messages had given him strength. He also began to notice that the messages themselves were evolving. People shared more than gratitude. They shared personal victories, moments of hope, and lessons learned. Each note became part of a larger narrative, a mosaic of human resilience and courage. He realized that his music had sparked something in others, a recognition that small acts, consistent effort, and quiet courage could transform lives in unexpected ways. As he prepared for bed, he thought about tomorrow. The piano would be waiting, the city would hum with its familiar sounds, and the possibility of new messages would await. He felt a sense of anticipation, not anxiety, because he had learned to trust the process. Each day offered a chance to connect, to inspire, and to practice bravery in the simplest, most profound ways. Part 4 ends with him resting, hands still tingling from the day's music, heart full from the hidden messages and the courage witnessed. He understood that life's bravest moments often went unseen, but their impact was undeniable. Each note played, each message received, and each act of perseverance contributed to a story far greater than himself. A story that would continue to unfold with every day he chose to play and to listen. The city had grown familiar, yet each day brought something new. He walked toward the public piano with a sense of purpose that had become steady over the years. The morning air was cool, carrying the faint smell of fresh pastries from a nearby bakery and the subtle hum of distant traffic. He carried his small box of messages, a tangible collection of voices he could not see, but deeply felt. Today, he knew, was just another day to play, to connect, and to listen. As he approached the piano, he noticed more people lingering than usual. Word had traveled slowly, quietly, of the blind pianist who played with unmatched sincerity. Some came from curiosity, others from a desire to feel the calm his music brought. He felt the presence of the crowd not with his eyes, but with the vibration of energy around him, the subtle shifts of movement, the hushed murmurs, the stillness that followed his first note. He settled into his usual position, hands hovering over the keys, and began to play. The music flowed effortlessly, each note shaped by experience, emotion, and the unseen stories of those who had left messages. He improvised, guided by intuition and the invisible connection he felt with the listeners. People stopped, some whispering softly to companions, others closing their eyes to absorb the sound fully. The piano became a bridge, not just between him and the people present, but between countless lives that had left traces through their written words. The messages had shaped him as much as he had influenced others. Midway through his set, a young man approached slowly, holding a carefully folded note. The note told a story of struggle, of nights spent in fear and despair, and how the music had been a quiet lifeline. He read the words aloud with the help of a kind stranger nearby. As the story unfolded, the crowd listened with rapt attention, and a hush fell over the square. Even in a bustling city, moments of shared humanity could be profound. Tears formed in his eyes, but he smiled through them, knowing that his playing had created a ripple far beyond the notes themselves. The music continued, stronger now, each chord resonating with emotion. He allowed himself to pause, letting silence breathe between notes, giving space for reflection. He sensed that the listeners were no longer passive observers. They were participants in a dialogue, even if unspoken. Their presence, their attentiveness, and their silent responses shaped each melody. In those moments, he understood fully that bravery was not just his own. It was shared, cultivated, and nurtured in everyone who listened and responded. Hours passed unnoticed. He moved from gentle, reflective melodies to stronger, more confident passages, weaving a narrative that no words could capture. Some notes were joyous, bright with hope, others somber, echoing shared sorrows and struggles. He played with total immersion, guided by the emotions in the messages he had received over time and the energy surrounding him. Each key was an extension of his understanding, each pause a deliberate invitation for connection. By late afternoon, the square had grown even quieter as people lingered, not wanting to leave the music behind. Some brought new notes, others simply stayed to experience the sound. One woman approached, hesitantly placing a letter at the edge of the piano. It told the story of her recovery from illness, her fears, and the way his music had reminded her of resilience. He felt the weight of her words, not as a burden, but as an honor. It reminded him that courage could take many forms, sometimes quiet, sometimes unseen, but always real. The pianist had grown into a figure of quiet inspiration. His music had become a vessel of empathy, a way to connect people across distance, circumstance, and fear. Each day he played not for applause, recognition, or reward, but because it was meaningful. Every note was an act of bravery, a choice to show up and give something valuable to the world, regardless of what came in return. The hidden messages had taught him that impact is often quiet, cumulative, and profound. As evening approached, he continued to play, feeling the energy of the city shift as the sun set. Lights flickered on, casting shadows across the square. He reflected on the countless messages he had received over time, stories of hope, struggle, kindness, and courage. Each note, each letter, each shared word had helped him see that bravery was not a singular act, but a series of small, consistent choices. Every day he showed up, every time he pressed a key, he participated in a larger story of human connection. He paused briefly to listen to the surrounding sounds, the murmur of people leaving, the distant laughter of children, the rhythmic clatter of footsteps on cobblestones. He felt deeply the invisible threads connecting all these lives. Even without sight, he could perceive the lives around him, intertwined with his own through sound, presence, and shared experience. The music had become a lens, allowing him to observe the world in ways he never could with eyes alone. A few familiar faces lingered as he played, having returned to the square again and again to experience the music and share new messages. They had witnessed his persistence, seen his courage in facing fear, and felt the depth of his empathy. Some left written words, others shared a smile or a nod. He realized that bravery was contagious, that quiet acts of courage could inspire others to act, speak, or feel more fully. The music was more than sound, it was a ripple of human spirit. After the last piece, he carefully packed up, feeling a quiet satisfaction. The square returned to its normal rhythm, and he walked home slowly, carrying the weight and the warmth of all he had experienced. The box of hidden messages was heavier than ever, filled with stories of lives touched and courage awakened. Each note reminded him that his music mattered, that presence mattered, and that bravery could exist even without recognition or reward. That night, back in his small apartment, he sat at his personal piano. He let his fingers move freely, playing melodies inspired by the day's interactions, the hidden messages, and the invisible connections he had sensed. The room was quiet, yet alive with sound. He understood now that bravery is not a single, heroic act. It is a choice repeated daily, an act of persistence, empathy, and courage in the smallest ways. His music had become a testament to that truth. As he prepared for bed, he thought of all the people whose lives had intersected with his, some for a moment, some for longer. He reflected on the impact of the notes, the messages, and the simple act of showing up every day to play. Each person had given him something in return: trust, honesty, hope. And in turn, he had given them music, presence, and the quiet courage to face life with a little more strength. Sleep came slowly that night, not out of restlessness, but out of reflection. He replayed melodies in his mind, the voices of the messages, the imagined expressions of those who had listened. There was a sense of fulfillment that could not be measured, a quiet happiness born from connection and shared humanity. He realized that his blindness had not limited him. It had allowed him to understand more deeply, to connect through sound and emotion in ways that sight alone could never capture. Part 5 ends with him embracing the knowledge that his journey, his music, and the hidden messages would continue. Each day was an opportunity to touch lives, to inspire courage, and to participate in the ongoing story of human resilience. He had learned that true bravery exists in showing up, in listening, in giving without expectation, and in trusting that even small actions can create ripples that reach far beyond what we see. And with that understanding, he rested, ready for the music and the messages of tomorrow.